What are your guys' thoughts on the state of the Metroid community, including our Aether Primus community?
I feel like we could have done a lot better to keep you guys up to date and keep things rolling. That's one thing for sure. And I feel like, given how busy we were, if there were still things that maybe we could have done to try and keep the community active, especially around these hypes, around the various hype cycles that we have had so far. First Dread, then Prime Remastered, and then now Prime 4. And really just being a little bit more open and in conversing with the audience about what's going on and everything. But we were just really bogged down by a lot of stuff, a lot of things. So
Yeah, just to like piggyback on what you're saying, I think we could have done better. And I don't think when I say we, I should really be saying me. I don't want to, put everybody and get everybody kind of lumped in the same thing, because there were definitely efforts made by members of the team, and I don't want those efforts to sound like they weren't there. They definitely were there. But as far as I'm concerned, as a texture artist, I think I shifted my focus I leaned too hard into another thing, in another direction. And because of that project, I had very little to say or do with the community. And I think that is probably the biggest thing I have to mention here. So that, and also I do think when I was involved with NPR, I didn't give myself enough time to hop into the calls. I think I've been on the Discord servers a couple of times, but whenever I do see, and there are times where members would just hop on just waiting there, it was absolutely in my best interest to have joined and chat with some of you. But not to sound all doom and gloom, I do think that it's good information and good experience to see where we are today in relation to where we were when we were working on NPR, and where we are at this moment. So it just helps make us more informed, or get more informed decisions down the road as it pertains to the community.
Yeah, I mean, the community's always been great. We've gone through a lot of different changes over the years. It started out just being a Discord for Samus Prime YouTube, and then we just kind of kept growing, and then I wanted to bring in more creators and just make it a partnership. And sometimes I guess I've felt bad that I haven't given you guys more stuff at the same time that we kind of work in spurts. We have lives. Sometimes things get to be overwhelming in our personal lives. We can't do anything. There's just nothing you can do about that. And it's happened, and it's happened, and it's happened. And that's just part of life. But we keep coming back to it because it's something we're passionate about. And I think that's what most people, they see. That's what piques their interest, is our passion for our art. So could tell the community that we are going to continue working on stuff. We've been working on stuff. Some things just didn't work out. We're going to go into that here in a minute too, but some things don't work out. And then there's also, as I said before, just life in general and things that take up our time. And so we have to put those things first because it's just how it is. But the fact that we keep coming back to this, I think that's why everybody also sticks around. So with that said, that's a good segue into talking about Aether Alpha and Project Outlander. And you were more involved than I was, but it'd be interesting, I think, to shed some light on that. So
for sure. And throughout the whole time, by the way, even between Outlander and now, there were several times we wanted to reach out to you guys, but we're really sorry about this. And hopefully, moving forward, we can constantly keep you guys up to date with what's going on just a little bit more. So moving on to Outlander, where do I begin? Regarding Outlander, when we first started with it, our goal was that, hey, we saw our success with Project NPR, and we wanted to do something that would first ensure that the wind wouldn't get blown out of our sails again, like how it happened with Project NPR, which sort of meant that we had to work on our own intellectual property, something which we could continue to work on, and something that would be in very much the same spirit as Metroid Prime. And that's how it initially started. Initially, there was quite a lot of planning, but things unfortunately got derailed, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the whole idea was to make a completely new IP that was entirely our own, and it was just something that was meant to be a fun project to start out with, and only when we were really ready to get like full on serious about it were we to make it into a proper production. But at first, the general idea was that this was something that we were just gonna do for fun, one for the community, plus just because we all loved Metroid Prime. I mean, that's basically where the whole thing came from.
I think I wanted to add a little bit to that. So just to give a greater context to this, upon the news of the remastered and the successful release of the remastered, there was a lot of conversation on like, what should we do next? Should we continue to work on it? Should we maybe start working on echoes? Pretty much every member got involved here and started to give suggestions, and a small group with myself, Ray 3D, and a smaller portion of the artists thought it would be cool to kind of make like a pseudo Metroid game, and just call it like our own IP for the case of just like giving it a name. But the idea behind that was, when we were working on Talon Overworld, there were some really bad UVs, and we couldn't get some really cool textures that we were working on, like these grass textures, to look right because we couldn't modify the models. But here in Unreal Engine, we have the opportunity to actually change something, whether it's the models, the lighting, the texturing, and then completely make something new out of it. So we were excited about it and used it as a means to learn and grow this into something that we could potentially take down the road, at least until we have an idea of what would happen with the MPR project. And so what happened was we got very invested in it, and there were so many permutations of like what the actual project was, and it eventually turned into a full-scale production of something that was of a scale that we weren't ready for. To put it lightly, without getting into any drama or anything. The scale was so out of bound that it became a train wreck. And honestly, I personally don't want to get too much into the details because I don't think those details matter. I don't think it's a case of us like expressing our, our opinions on what worked and what didn't work, but more a case of like, I think we need to look back at this as an experience and think, okay, where did it all go wrong? And I think that was the most important question that I had lingering as the project continued to develop and turn into something that really wasn't what both myself, Ray, and some of the other texture artists intended for down the road.
People don't know how to manage their expectations. They have these grandiose ideas, and then they're willing to put in the amount of work that it takes to try to achieve that. So it's definitely something to be commended. But when you're doing that in an environment of everyone giving of their time for free, I mean, nobody's being reimbursed here. You're all trying to do something for free, basically. And then you got to work, you got to do different things to be able to pay for that time. Other people have other arrangements. They may not necessarily need to work full time in order to live. And so they have more time, and so they're able to give more time, but then they have a different expectation then, because now they've given all their time to something, they're expecting something out of it. Giving all my time, why can't you give all your time? And that's the one thing that we had to constantly work on with the project MPR was being able to manage all of our expectations. There was times where I was just really ready to go, but maybe you have to wait for someone else, and it can be very frustrating. But you have to always remember that you're all trying to achieve a common goal, and therefore you got to respect each other's time. And that's kind of hard for some people, I think.
it's also one of those things where I think you can quickly lose focus on what matters. We definitely needed to take a step back to look at Project Outlander from an objective
Yes.
standpoint and see, okay, how much of this is taking out of our day-to-day lives, and what realistic goals can we actually accomplish within the time frame that we have, because we're all busy working adults. We all have things to do, families to feed. It's very difficult to just work on something with no real goal in sight. And that's when a big question mark kind of like came on our heads. It's just like, okay, we never intended this to be like an actual game that we would find publishing and maybe even do some crowdfunding and then put out there. This was just for us to like learn a little bit more about the production of games, as well as take our experience from NPR from phase one, and then just kind of like see what that would look like in an Unreal Engine project. And because we forgot that, it started to go into crazy territory. We dived headfirst into this and did not consider the potential consequences of, okay, what would happen if we didn't actually plan this out. And so what ended up happening was we had a relationship dynamic that I didn't think was very strong, that worked well, and we were making a lot of decisions that I don't think the whole group was agreeing on things. Like this is what I meant by like NPR felt so much better in hindsight, because everybody knew what was up, everybody agreed on everything. We were all directed in one direction, and if anybody had an opinion they needed to express, or a slight deviation in a different direction, it was respected. And on top of that, sometimes even exercise. This, I'm not trying to make this sound like draconian. The point I'm really trying to push here is that at no point did I feel uncomfortable working with the people I was working with, and we all respected each other as a result. Come to this project, though, it wasn't like that. There were clearly working conditions that I think was creating a dynamic where basically you had to deliver something on time at this time. Otherwise, here's an ultimatum. And if you don't follow through with this ultimatum, then X, Y, Z. And I can say for like most projects that I've worked on, especially voluntary projects, something like that should never happen when you're a volunteer. So it was enough for me to say, okay, I gotta go. And I wanted to leave the project immediately after that. It was sad that it had happened, and I don't want to, go too in depth on what exactly that is, because I don't think it's productive for you guys, nor is it productive for us, and for all those involved. But essentially, it was good experience for me to realize that I don't want to be put under this stressful position of trying to deliver something to meet a certain expectation when that was never the intention. I'm sure, Ray, you could add more to it, since Ray and I were mostly involved.
Absolutely. There were several things that went wrong. Now, I'm not going to put blame on like, oh, this person did this and this is why this happened. In general, there was a lot of protocol that we should have followed right from the beginning, and that we didn't. One of the things that NPR was even as little successful as it was is the fact that we had a protocol for doing things. And there was a pipeline that was established wherein we could submit our textures, test our textures, compile our textures in a correct format, and then test them. Not only that, there was also a focus on like, okay, who's tackling which room, which area. Everything was done in sort of this very methodical manner, which gave us a pretty robust pipeline, even with just bare minimum tools that we had. Heck, Sir Mangler even made us, I remember in NPR, a Discord bot which would automate some of these processes for us, like submitting textures and stuff. And this is something that we really lacked in Outlander. And when this issue was raised, unfortunately, there was really not much push to take this matter seriously. And so everything became quite scatterbrained. And because everything was very scatterbrained, there was no focus. Things were just shifted up overnight without my consent. Like, you would
Yeah.
have 1 week where we were doing something, and then if you had to take a break for like a week, and then you had to come back the next week, and the next thing you realized that the second week you're doing something completely different, and the entire focus was something that was constantly shifting from one point to another, and the goalpost was also constantly moving. And the more the goalpost kept moving, the more ambitious things started to get, the more overwhelming things started to get. And so,
may I add something to what you said, real quickly?
yeah, sure, absolutely.
I'm going to go into a little bit of detail here. This is something that actually bothered me a lot, and it was just the lack of correspondence. There was a severe lack of correspondence and a severe lack of communication in general, because people would take unilateral decisions to do a whole bunch of stuff behind people's back, and I don't appreciate this, especially when it comes to something that we're all supposed to come together and work on. My thought process is, if you're going to do crowdfunding, you have to deliver on what the investors are paying us for, right? When people put their money in a Kickstarter, they want their expectations to be met. And I know that we're not in the position to be building a full game top to bottom in the span of time that, many of the members wanted us to develop this game in. It was way beyond scope. And on top of that, we were getting more foreign, I guess you can call it foreign intervention, with all kinds of members joining from random places that, many of these members would just talk to like 1 or 2 people and then join the project. And then I would wake up one night and then find out 3 people are in the team now. And, there is no vetting as well. We don't like sit down with the people and then, tell them, hey, this is a voluntary project. You're only going to be giving us your time if you have the time to give it. Otherwise, we're not paying you. And, there were conversations of like, hey, do this, I'll pay you that. Some conversations were just very inappropriate for what we were doing. And I needed to see myself out the door. That it was that bad. Like, it got to that point where, Ray 3D, as he was talking, he had to take a week break because he had some family obligations. And he had developed a very comprehensive way for us to achieve at least the goal that we had once things started to get out of hand. And then it got flipped on itself. I was kind of like a mediator in this. I tried to see both sides, and I definitely gave some pushback to Ray on this, and I want to apologize, Ray, because I really did wanted to see the other team members' perspectives on this. But then it got to the point when almost everybody agreed against Ray's original design, which wasn't like his best design, but it was by purpose, because he was looking at it from a production standpoint. Can we get this done within a lot of time?
Yes.
And if we didn't listen to him, we would be shooting ourselves in the foot. And unfortunately, we did not listen to him, and we shot ourselves in the foot. And we were left with a project that was just too ambitious. Like, I'll put it this way, okay? At one point, I actually asked myself, are we competing with Metroid Prime 4? Like, it was getting to that point now where like, are we actually competing with Metroid Prime 4?
So it sounds like there was a lot of learning from that project. Is there
absolutely.
Is there any like lessons that stand out or anything that you may want to apply moving forward to a new project?
Definitely. Like, one of the biggest things is just respect for a production. Like, one has to understand when you're doing something and you're doing it for a production, there are certain things that you can't go too ambitious on. You have to vet things like time, budget, etc. And especially when this entire thing was a voluntary project. And as Sardines mentioned, yes, we did have a plan which was completely off the rails. That original plan was something as simple as having a level that looked like the inside of a cave, and with a couple of enemies and a boss. It was meant to be that simple, and the reason for its sheer level of simplicity was the fact that it would allow us to vet things ourselves. It would allow us to vet the entire pipeline from start to finish, because if we were able to publish just that much, it would give us a good sort of like a good sample size, like a rehearsal of what challenges we were to expect later on. A large portion of the team looked at that and thought, like, hey, this wasn't too interesting. As I was at one point told, like, I don't like people wouldn't be interested in seeing a cave. Like, even to my own detriment, I sort of conceded and be like, okay, fine. But then when we did try to retrofit and stuff, that's when things really went off the rails, because things became so ambitious. Like, it felt like we were competing with Prime 4, and as Sardines mentioned. So it just really comes down to understanding production cycles and how it works, and just having that level of respect for it to say that, hey, let's do it on the most simple surface level way possible to vet an entire pipeline from start to finish, and do it as a rehearsal. Like, it doesn't have to be beautiful, it doesn't have to be grandiose. We're not trying to impress anyone other than our, just to test whether or not whether or not things would work.
I have one thing I want to add to that, and this probably might be my last point regarding Outlander, because I do think that we're on this topic and we've covered a few, things that we've mentioned in the past. But there's one thing personal to me that, and again, I'm going to refrain from too many details. I'm just going to focus on the main thing. There was a time where I was very invested in the project and I was doing the VFX for the project. And, I was learning a lot of different things, doing VFX in Unreal, using the Niagara systems. I even, started to learn how to do things in Houdini, and I was just so invested in this. It was a great feeling to have. And it was one of those things where, going by the original intention of our project, we use this as an opportunity to learn, but more importantly, this is a voluntary thing, as I stated numerous times already, that once the production wheel started to slow down and there was less momentum, people were upset that certain things were not being delivered in proportionality to what other departments have done. So let's say programmers, for example, had completed all their tasks. They'd be waiting and twiddling their thumbs for the artists to get on the same boat. But the thing is, it's okay for programmers to, do a task or two and get it done over the week, but to get every art assets, modeled in at their blockout stage, and then eventually, their finalized stage, UV unwrapped, textured, it's just an enormous amount of work to get done in a reasonable amount of time. And it wasn't something I was interested in doing. This was one of those cases where I, even though I'm very capable of doing it, I didn't want to continue to do that stuff. I wanted to squarely focus on the VFX stuff. And then lo and behold, some members were really upset about that. And they gave me an ultimatum basically saying that we don't need to do this. And I know, I don't want to go into who, it doesn't matter. The most important thing is I left that project because it was just not good for me. And, I now know in future projects we have to make our expectations crystal clear. And we also have to respect, as Ray stated numerous times, we have to show respect to the production. If we're volunteers, we don't have the luxury of paying people. We don't have the luxury of ordering people to do things. It just has to be that way. And unless we have contracts and we do things by the book, I want to avoid unnecessary drama like this again in future projects. And last thing, and then I'll give it back to you, Ray. I don't want to make this sound like we're victims of something. We're not. We were all learning, including the people that we, didn't end up making, keeping our relationship changed, of course, after this. They were trying their best too. We all wanted the same things. And I just think it was a case of lack of experience and also just incompatibility in many situations that ultimately didn't make this project go all the way through to the finish line.
Yeah, and just so we're clear, this is like as much as my fault as it is anyone else's. It was very easy for, including myself, to get caught up in hype cycles and just cave into popular demand, as to put it lightly. So there really isn't. This really isn't a blame game of trying to figure it out. Oh, whose fault? No. If it's a production, then, and if the production falls apart, basically, almost everyone would be at fault there.
I'm willing to take the blame for a lot of this because ultimately,
Yeah.
I don't. The message we're trying to convey is that pointing out to an individual and saying like this is the person responsible is the most bad faith way of us addressing the situation.
Exactly.
Because this is ultimately something that we want to address to you
Yes.
guys, and I don't think you guys want to hear drama like this. Maybe some of you do, but I think the most productive thing is for us to just acknowledge that for those reasons we decided to not work with them. Well, okay, basically the way it worked out was, I was out of the project. I didn't want to work with them anymore, so I left. And then shortly after, members started to lose confidence in the project, and they started to take it more seriously, the concerns that we initially addressed. And then shortly after, Ray left as well. And then at that point, it was out of our hands. The project, Outlander, we had already made peace with what it was. And I really don't know what happened next. But from what I saw later down the road, some of you may have seen a message or two on the server, which have been deleted. Not by us, just to be clear, we didn't delete any messages. Those messages were deleted by the author. When those messages came out, it explained kind of like what happened from that person's point of view. And yeah, that's really it regarding Outlander. So I apologize to all of you who were excited about that. We will be way more transparent about our projects and what we're going to be doing in our projects and future projects. And we're definitely going to downsize the scale and scope. I think we were too high on the NPR stuff, and we were really looking forward to seeing where we can take it on the next level. But now that we have this experience, I think we are wiser for it. And if those relationships that didn't end up working out, if those can get amended down the road, and maybe we can come back together for something else, who knows? But we don't hold any animosity towards anyone, and especially for myself, I am just way more clear about what it is that I need to get done and what I want to focus on moving forward.
And for the record, I really do appreciate a lot of the talent that we did have, especially some of our programmers and stuff. I think they did a tremendous job for the time that they were on, and I really appreciate all the time and effort that they put in. And I also learned a lot from them during this whole process. So it wasn't all entirely fruitless, or it wasn't all doom and gloom as we were making it sound. There were many lessons. I feel like this was a necessary thing to happen, and a part of me is also glad that I'm glad that it did. I'm glad it happened now sooner than later, and we just had tremendous amount of experience learning from each other, and learning how things sort of work together, and part of that is also understanding that not everything is within your scope, and that's like the biggest lesson that I've possibly learned throughout the whole thing, is that you have to keep your hype in check, because it's very easy to get carried away thinking that it would be really cool to do X, Y, or Z a certain way, or this would look cool if he did this, or that would be so cool, be so nice in theory. The real test is when we actually start to put things into practice, and that is something that's where we realized that things weren't going as we would have liked.
So where are you guys at today as far as that goes? Is this still something you're trying to actively pursue?
The project Outlander is something that is completely shut down. I don't think that it's ever going to see any updates or a revival. The project has been cancelled. As for any future updates, we'll see. Like I said, there's a much more cautious approach towards any of this kind of stuff, at least from my end. I have to constantly try to keep myself in check to see if I'm even capable of executing on certain demands. So we'll see where this takes us, but hopefully sooner than later we might have something to share.
Yeah, I think that it's just a long road, and so sometimes you gotta go back to the books, start learning again, figure things out, and just don't give up, keep putting things together, and I think eventually you'll get where you want to be.
Are we still working on our own game or IP at the end?